Well, hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. Welcome to the Joe Cioffi Weather Show. This is the 15th of November, 2019, and we have much going on tonight. Not that it's covering a huge geographic area, but we do actually have a potent storm that is developing off the southeast coast of the U.S., and that is going to be front and center, I think, in tonight's discussion. Also, the chairman, Scott Briller, mentioned last night, had reminded me that we have it was an anniversary, and it was a year to go today that we had to deal with the what turned out to be, for a lot of areas, the biggest snowfall of the entire winter. And it was the 3 to 6 inch snowfall that occurred in the New York City metro area, and the 6 to 12 inch snowfall that occurred in areas just inland. And it created a nightmare commute. And it also created a nightmarish response in that we had, it came at a time of year where municipalities don't budget for snow removal. They were caught flat-footed. The forecasts, of course, the forecasters were thrown under the bus, as they always are, by politicians. And the truth is, for several nights beforehand, I can remember, certainly if you want to debate whether it was 2 nights or 3 nights ahead of time, but certainly the day before, myself, Joe Rayo, we both came on and made it a point to say that regardless of how much snow was going to fall, it was going to be an absolutely nightmarish commute. And apparently that didn't play, and that wasn't heard, nor were the winter weather advisories that apparently went up as well. So, there was a lot of false information that was sort of spread afterward. I'm at the point in my life right now where, and it's been like this for a long time, that sort of stuff just rolls off my back. I really have, I don't really pay too much attention to it. So, you're telling me that the sound is good. So that's a plus. I guess I got my levels where they should be, or at least I hope I have my levels where they should be. And we're going to get started. So what I think we're going to do is I'm going to start with we're going to go back to a year ago before we get going on what's happening at the moment. Let's go back to a year ago and look at what the surface map was like. And actually, in a lot of ways, the way that storm behaved pretty much was a signal for how a lot of weather systems behave during the wintertime, where we had warm Pacific air or warm Pacific jet that was in play. And eventually the snow changed over to rain, at least along the coast, but there were higher amounts certainly. And in inland spots, one of the things that really stood out on that was the very, very favorable surface that was showing up on the weather maps that Wednesday night with that big high. This was Wednesday night going into Thursday, where you had a fairly strong high pressure cell sitting just north of Lake Ontario, and that was pretty cold air that was draining down from upstate New York southward. Temperatures in the teens and even a couple of single digits up there with that high. And we saw the cold air kind of drain in. You can see the isobars are pointing, making sort of a V shape in eastern Pennsylvania down into Virginia, kind of wedging that cold air southwestward. You see it even more in the 9Z surface map here into western Virginia and into western North Carolina. That's the weight of the cold air building down the east side of the Appalachians, and it's often a signature of, so as I said, favorable surface conditions. You have a coastal front along the Carolinas. This was at 7 a.m. on that morning. Coastal front developing in the Carolinas, and of course the precip. Whoop, that wasn't supposed to happen. That was my fault. Sorry about that. Let me reset that again. Hit the wrong button. This is what happens. Hang on. Whoa. 18. By the way, if you go to this map, this is wpc.net, nsep.noaa.gov, and there's a zoom map option on their website. You can certainly find it. So I'll just run back a couple of hours here. So let's go to the 12Z map. So you see that coastal front that develops. Actually, if I go a little further south, you've got a less than 10, 12 surface low sitting off the South Carolina coast. And your setup was here, at least from the standpoint from the surface, with all the cold air that was draining down from the north. You had the setup for a breakout of at least some heavy snow, and that's exactly what happened. This is at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and this is at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And this was at the point where it was snowing fairly hard in many areas in and around New York City and back through eastern Pennsylvania. If you look, I don't know if you can see it on this map. If you look carefully, what looks like in eastern Pennsylvania, what looks like a star there. There's actually three of them. Those are 4-star heavy snow symbols. When they plot them on a map, that's how they look on the map plot. And you definitely had some bands of heavy snow that developed. Where I was in southern Westchester County, because I was working that night, the snow lasted maybe about 4 hours or so, and it snowed very hard for a relatively short period of time. Put down a quick 3 or 4 inches. Now I'm on the southern end of Westchester County. That day I was in the southern end of Westchester County, near the shores of Long Island Sound, and it changed over on time. It took longer to change inland. You see the isobars here coming in from the east. We were able to hold on to the cold air only so long, because the high finally moved into eastern Maine, and then right after that, it just kind of weakened a bit, and then you start to get the flow in around the low, which is a much warmer flow, and that put an end to the snow in most places. Still was going on inland as of 8 o'clock that evening, and then by 10 o'clock, your surface low is creeping up the coast, just inland of the coast. And I wonder what would have happened if you had a setup that would have favored the low being out a little bit further offshore. Perhaps the colder air would have wedged in a little longer, and it would have produced an even more significant snowfall. But certainly an interesting event. And one of the things that came out of all of this, by the way, was the fact that we saw in the coming winter months towns salting when temperatures were in the 40s and 50s. The sheer overreaction that occurred from as a result of this. People got stuck in horrendous traffic, taking 6 or more hours to get home. Trust me when I tell you that over the years I've driven in many snow events where that has happened to me as well. I can understand the frustration over it, but this was not really. I think it was. I don't think it was any. There's no one you could really blame for stuff like this. It just happens, and typically, in fear of it happening again, there was a needless overreaction. And maybe if towns want to budget for snow removal in the month of November, it would have been a different story, because they didn't want to authorize the overtime, and that was pretty much it. And by the way, the snow disappeared relatively quickly. That low crept up inland of the New Jersey coast, so temperatures warmed up fairly fast once the low went by. You can see the actual low center is right over Long Island, and temperatures had a tough time warming inland, but we did get rid of all of this in a big hurry. That's one thing you might want to realize about November snows. If they do occur early, they're going to disappear. It's just by the fact that temperatures are going to reflexively try to go back toward the average high, which is still over 50. It's not likely that you're able to put snow cover on the ground and keep it on the ground for any length of time this time of year. It's just way too early. Get to about a month from now on the calendar, and we could have a very different conversation. Okay, so let's go to today's surface map. And of course, we're waiting for another cold front to come through and another high, a cold high to build in that's over the Great Lakes. And that's one of the pieces to the weekend puzzle. The actual front is still back up, at least as of 5 o'clock, was just about crossing Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. But this is all going to be part of the equation with this developing low that is off the South Carolina coast right now. And this is going to become a major storm when it's all said and done in terms of the impacts to coastal North Carolina and southeastern Virginia, and maybe even a small section of the coast in South Carolina. The low is going to get wrapped up, and it's also going to stall for a while tomorrow into tomorrow night, because that big high to the north is going to prevent this from moving out quickly, and that impacts the weather that is going to be occurring up to the north later on in the weekend and into Monday morning. I think that the high is going to be key in how long it takes precip to move northward, and also how far west is that rain going to be, because I don't know that it's going to be that far west. We certainly the coastal areas of New Jersey, Long Island, southern New England, and maybe a good chunk of New England will get into some of this in terms of the rain eventually. But as far as areas west of there, that's a totally different story. So why don't we take a look at watches and warnings that are up at the moment. And give me 1 second here, because I didn't preload that map up, but I want to just bring it to everyone's attention. You don't have a lot going on across the nation, by the way, and it's actually relatively quiet. So all the one main weather event that's in play is the system off the southeast coast, and all that bluish purple that you see, those are storm warnings that are up for the coastal waters. So the storm warnings 50 knots or better, and that is covering a large portion of geography. The immediate coast in South Carolina is not under a storm warning. It's under a gale warning, and actually gales extend. Gale warnings actually run from Maine all the way down to Florida. So it's a pretty extensive area of gale warnings that we see here. But storm warnings are up for the North Carolina coast to about southeastern Virginia. And here's where you might wind up seeing, in the immediate coastal waters there, sustained winds of about 50 knots. Now, here's a close-up view. This is the current map with temperatures. And by the way, that relatively cold air has actually been sinking southward. These are 7 p.m. temperatures, and we've gone over to a western northwest wind, and temperatures are starting to fall, definitely falling off of the day's highs. But it's pretty chilly down in Virginia and North Carolina, with temperatures in the 30s and low 40s at the moment. And also right near the coast, we've got coastal flood warnings up from the southern part of the Delmarva Peninsula and through southeastern Virginia, and that continues down into North Carolina. Various high wind warnings are up and high wind watches, along with some flood advisories. So this is going to be a fairly busy next couple of days. And we also have coastal flood advisories, I believe, in the lighter green colors here, that extend down the coastline near Wilmington, and then along the areas in South Carolina from about halfway up the coast north of Charleston over toward Myrtle Beach. So, and there even, temperatures are in the low 50s. You can see the winds along the coast here are not especially strong at the moment. A few gusts to about 20 to 30 miles an hour, but it's very, very early in the game. We'll probably start to see the strongest winds occur later on tonight, and certainly during the day tomorrow. So on the satellite, the water vapor satellite loop tonight, really impressive here. When you look at it, you can see the moisture that is with the upper low, the southern part of this split flow jet stream that is sitting in back through Georgia and Alabama. And you look at all the feed, the tropical moisture feed here is fairly impressive. On the lower left, you're actually seeing outflow from a new Pacific tropical storm Raymond. So some of that outflow moisture is actually getting drawn across the Gulf of Mexico, and you got a pretty good feed of tropical moisture coming up from West Cuba and over Florida, and then just getting pulled northward. The extent of that mid-level moisture reaches just to about New York City, and of course, you've got the trough now. The northern part of this jet stream is doing its thing, and we'll draw in our respective jets. And here's your northern. Wait a second. There we go. Here's your northern part of the jet stream here, And of course, you've got this southern part. And one of the things that is not going to be happening here is that the northern trough is not going to be phasing with this. It's not going to pick it up, and it really isn't going, and it's not going to kick it out. This is going to wind up heading up toward the Carolina coast and kind of lingering here. There's another trough that's going to be dropping into the northwest. That one is going to lift. It's going to kick this out and sort of lift it up at the same time. And the big question is, in the process of lifting it up, how far left is that surface low going to be? And that's going to tell us whether the impact from all of this is going to wind up being only along the immediate coast. Are we going to see something where only perhaps this area here, you get a low that's off the southeast coast that winds up going out to the northeast, so that the impacts are limited to, say, coastal southeastern and coastal southern New England, eastern New Jersey, down through Delaware and into Virginia, North Carolina? I think it'll be a further inland regardless. Or are you going to wind up with that upper trough exerting a little bit more pull, and you take a surface low that maybe is a bit more to the left? And in which case, and if the upper low remains intact, you could wind up, spreading that back edge of rain much further to the west into Pennsylvania. That's something that the NAM model today and for the last couple of days has been arguing would happen. The global models are less bullish with that. They're trying to show something that kicks out on more to the northeast. And I'm kind of thinking that, looking at the upper air and how far apart the two troughs are, that this thing should probably be able to make more of an eastward component of motion as opposed to a northward component. But we're going to, this is where you just kind of sit back, watch, and track, okay? The models will help you, but at the end of the day, it's what you're seeing aloft and what you're seeing in front of you. So you keep your eyes on the satellite, the radar, and it will tell the story. You've got that moisture kind of advecting northeastward. See all these high clouds in eastern North Carolina to about New York City to southeast. You also can see the upper air feature, the upper low, back on the western end of the cloud shield over Alabama and Georgia, and that's kind of spinning around there. And the front with this, by the way, is pushing down across Florida and will sweep across the entire state. So at the end of the day, when this is all said and done, with that low intensifying off the North Carolina coast tomorrow, it's going to draw that cooler air fairly far to the south. So you're going to have this low that's sitting out in here for a good 24 hours. So all of this air is going to drain southward. So expect some changes in southern Florida. Central and South Florida didn't really get too involved in that cold air of last week. And I'm thinking this time around that some of the relatively cold air is going to get drained down fairly far to the south. In the meantime, you've got this next weather front here that is moving southeastward, that other than clouds really doesn't have much to it, and that is going to push offshore and probably just disappear. The air mass is going to just pretty much mesh up with what's already there. You notice it wasn't really that warm today. In spite of the fact that we're warming up ahead of a cold front, we only managed to get up into the low 50s, which is barely, in my area anyway. Most places to the south, the issue was clouds that held temperatures down. So really, we weren't even able to reflexively bounce back to average temperatures for this time of year. So the presence of this storm system and all this cloud cover prevented any kind of a warm up. And this time of year, especially, having cloud cover is something that holds temperatures down quite a bit and can really impact your forecast. Now, on the radar at the moment, we've had this rather large concentration of rain in eastern North Carolina, some heavy rains down along the coast. It looks like from about Morehead City down to toward Wilmington, Nice concentration there, and also offshore. You're also seeing with the upper low, there are some rain and heavier downpours back across South Carolina and Georgia, and particularly in this area back in east central Alabama. So you've got two things here. You've got the advection precip that is developing right in this area and back through here. This is right there. And number two, that's with the upper low. Your surface low is down in here someplace. You've got a frontal boundary that's lying offshore. You got those winds coming in from the southeast, and that is creating this large area of overrunning rain. And what's back through here is being generated by the upper low, so it's a little bit more convective in nature. I did, by the way, pull up SPC's forecast. I just don't quite know what I did with it. I'll find it. But they're not going for any kind of severe weather here. They are going for a general area of thunderstorms for coastal North Carolina and parts of Georgia and in South Florida. This was for tonight. And then for tomorrow, no thunderstorms except for the area in coastal North Carolina and just inland. The rest of the U.S. is just absolutely quiet, but a general chance that there could be a few thunderstorms with this. I don't really think this is going to be a severe weather situation because the actual low stays offshore and the frontal boundaries with this remain offshore. It's not like you have a sweeping warm front with all this warm tropical air coming inland. That kind of gets kept back out over the coastal waters. And from the standpoint of precip, I do have WPC's 3-day rainfall forecast map, and I think it really kind of tells a lot in terms of what they're thinking on all of this. So this is the 1 to 3 day total, and this is the 1 to 5 day total. So the 1 to 5 day total, when it's all said and done, the rains in North Carolina, eastern North Carolina, and into South Carolina are going to be substantial. The lightest blue is up to 1.5 inches. So you start to get into those darker reds. You're talking about 3, 4, and even some 5-inch plus amounts in the Outer Banks. That bright orange, what looks like that bright yellowish orange spot just east of Cape Hatteras in the coastal waters, that's 10 inches or more. So that's really impressive. Now, in terms of the clues you can gather here from what they think in the Northeast, the precip in the lightest green is 1/10 of an inch or less. So I guess what WPC is thinking is that the track of this low moving northward will eventually sweep back a little bit of rain westward, and the rain that gets into eastern Pennsylvania and in Virginia and Maryland, Washington, D.C., Baltimore. So let's say from I-95 north and west, we're talking about minimal amounts of rain. And for the immediate coast, we're only talking about maybe 1/10 to 1/4 of an inch. The darkest green is a 1/2 inch. And that straddles southeastern New England and coastal Maine, touching Cape May in southern New Jersey, across southern Delaware, moves down into southeastern Virginia. So it's fairly tight here with respect to the back edge. So, and I think it makes the most sense given what the models are doing with regards to the upper air. So why don't we take a look? We'll come back to that. That's for the long range. So let's take a look at what some of the late afternoon and evening weather models. We're going to start with the NAM model. Actually, we'll start with the HRRR, okay, because at least that'll take us through the first part of tomorrow, and we'll see what the HRRR has to say here. So the HRRR model, you've got your developing low off the North Carolina coast. You'll notice that during the night it goes absolutely nowhere. You just keep getting these bands of rain that come in over the coastal waters. And in fact, what more than likely happens here, I mean, it almost looks like the low is moving west-southwestward. In reality, you're probably having a low that forms on the point of, there's perhaps a bit of an occlusion that develops here to some degree, and that one piece tries to go out to the northeast, and then as the upper low swings around, you get a second low that develops, and that's what it's pinning out off the South Carolina coast. I think that's the low that winds up developing into something more substantial. And at least through This is through noon tomorrow. This is where you start to see those winds really pick up along the Carolina coast. So just looking at it tonight from the standpoint of the 10-meter wind, by the time we get to tomorrow morning, this is where you're seeing in that whole yellow area sustained gales. They actually run up almost into southeastern Virginia. And by noon tomorrow, you've got some 30 and 40 knot winds sustained just offshore. Winds are also picking up in Chesapeake Bay. The NAM will take us a bit longer with this, and also is much more bullish with the wind because it has a much more wrapped up low further to the north than the HRRR does with that 1,001 millibar low. I think, I think it's quite possible that you're going to wind up having just one low center, and models are going to have a difficult time. There might be multiple low centers in this stretched out northeast, southwest, northeast. If you wind up with one of those lows becoming the main deep low, which is what the NAM is arguing, you could have some rather strong winds there. Those are 40 knot plus sustained winds being forecast by the NAM, not only off the North Carolina coast south of Hatteras, but for northeastern North Carolina and southeastern Virginia and out over the coastal waters. And look at how those strong winds, by the way, increase as the high builds in from the north. Let's run it back. You can see that high building in upstate New York and New England. This is at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. And now you've got sustained gales up to about just north of Atlantic City. So the winds are really picking up as you move up the coast. And by Sunday morning, those gales are up to about Long Island and southeastern New England. And then there's some fairly strong winds east of New Jersey, south of Long Island. The actual surface low by this point, if you follow that along, you'll notice on the NAM, it just kind of does this counterclockwise loop and then begins to swing out to the east and before it moves more to the north and heads over toward Cape Cod. That's a pretty far left track that the NAM is indicating. So this is where this model is showing us that it wants to bring that rain. One of the things that happens with the system like this, which is if you look at it on how the signature here on the surface, it's pretty sprawling. You've got this arm that's lifting up and around with a very large area of rain. So as it moves northward, the storm actually kind of spreads out. So that causes the rain area on the northwest side to spread out. And that's why the model has some rain that comes in for Sunday night into early Monday. This is Sunday night at 10 o'clock, which is as far, wait, hold on. I got to keep going. And then, of course, your low moving northeastward. By the way, the NAM and some of the other models producing some mixed precipitation in parts of upstate New York, up the Hudson Valley, the middle and upper Hudson Valley, and across northern Vermont and New Hampshire. That is sleet or freezing rain. That's being indicated there on the NAM model. A little cold air comes in toward the end, then you see that change over to snow once the low moves up into Maine. It also, the NAM would suggest that you would get some pretty heavy rains moving up into much of New England. The areas west of the coast, the immediate coast from New York City south, really don't get very much out of this. But New England catches more of it because of how the low tracks, moving northeast to about Cape Cod. If it takes that track and is as deep as a 990 or maybe a 988 low, you're going to have some fairly strong winds along coastal areas from southeastern New England all the way down in through New Jersey. And of course, points southward will have stronger winds too as the low makes its approach and it moves northward. The upper air features here, again, one of the issues is, you've got this first trough. Normally what might happen in a situation like this, by the way, is if this northern trough that you see here, this is for right now, basically right now, 7 o'clock this evening. This is what the NAM forecast. So your northern trough is already kind of bypassed it. This thing is pretty well away from the base of that northern trough. So it's getting left behind. Oftentimes in situations like this, if the northern trough was a little stronger, it would have pretty much come down and this thing would have gotten kicked out to the east or the east-northeast, and that would have been it. And I think if you look back at some older models of model runs of the GFS, That is what they were doing in taking it out further to the east. But it bypasses that, so that sort of leaves this thing underneath. If you notice, by tomorrow, this is late tomorrow afternoon, you've got a building ridge here north of central New Jersey. There's a building ridge in the upper atmosphere, and this kind of leaves this thing sitting down here waiting for something to come along and either pick it up or kick it out. And now, of course, as we move through Sunday afternoon, there's your catalyst. Your next trough is swinging down from Minnesota to East Texas. Your upper low here is very vigorous off the North Carolina coast, and it has now got its kicker, and it will get kicked along to the northeast. Again, the question in my mind is if this trough is deeper, in other words, if it's more intense, if it's more north-south and kind of extends a little bit further south into the western Gulf of Mexico, you might wind up having the opposite reaction here, where you take this low further northwest of what the current track is. And on this particular model run, it actually did kind of, the NAM anyway, was trying to takes it pretty far to the northwest. The upper low is sitting just off the New Jersey coast, and here's your trough going negative. So instead of just like ejecting it out straight to the east, it's almost acting like a lever and lifting it like on a teeter-totter. You're pulling down one side and it's sort of and it's lifting up the other. The GFS, on the other hand, is, and the European to a large extent earlier today was kind of along the same lines from what I looked of it. The GFS here, see, it kind of keeps them a bit more separate. Your upper low on the GFS is further offshore. It's out here, well east of New Jersey and south of Nantucket. Your trough is going negative. It's trying to do the same thing, except that it swings it out further east first and then starts to turn it more northward when it's already by. And this would, again, argue with the idea that maybe the back edge of the rain perhaps reaches western New Jersey, the New Jersey-Pennsylvania line for a short time. The wind may still wind up being an issue. And then, of course, the whole trough just kind of lifts it up and out. And you'll have to wait till later on Tuesday to clear that upper air trough here in the eastern part of the United States. By the way, for those of you watching from the rest of the country, I have not forgotten you. I will go back and we'll take a look at what's going on elsewhere. So if we run back the GFS model, you see where it has the low. It takes it out almost straight east and then starts to turn it northward when it's already out at about 67 or so, 67, 68 west, and brings it up toward the Gulf of Maine. It's the GFS loves to do things like that, where it loves to be a bit more suppressed. I would tend to think that it's probably too far out to the east with its view and its track. That the NAM might be too far west, so perhaps you can split the difference between the two and come up with a compromise. Here's the Icon model, which I haven't looked at. This is the first look I'm getting of it. So this is from the late this afternoon's Icon model, and I guess you could argue that this is more like the GFS than, certainly more like the GFS than the NAM. But you see what happens as it gets further north, and the system just kind of starts to spread out a little bit. The rain back edges back to southeastern from the southeast. This is Monday morning. It also argues, by the way, if you have plans for the weekend, if you are in the northern mid-Atlantic states and you've got or into New England, I'm going to draw a line. So if you're, say, north of that line, okay, it's going to be hard pressed for you to get into any rain here on Saturday. You are going to be cold, no doubt about it, with that cold northeast wind tomorrow and temperatures not out of the 30s. But as far as rain is concerned, it's going to be a bit of a struggle. You might deal with some light rain or drizzle on Sunday, because I think one of the things that happens here on Sunday is that the flow, if you notice, the isobars now are much more easterly instead of northeasterly. So now you're going to bring in You're certainly going to bring in clouds, and you probably will bring in some ocean moisture, so that it's quite possible that while you won't get into the steadier rain, which would be more down in this area, but you certainly could get into some light rain or drizzle on Sunday. I didn't put it in my forecast. I did say that it was going to be cloudy and raw, and definitely on the breezy side, especially along the coast. But I really didn't go crazy mentioning any rain on Sunday, and kind of held it off for Sunday night and Monday. I think it does come in. Now, the icon wants to bring in some cold air there on the backside and change it over to snow in upstate New York Monday night into Tuesday, which is an interesting solution. The other models are kind of doing that. I would not be surprised, by the way, to see some mixing going on in those areas to the north and west. If you can keep that upper low intact and keep it strong enough, you might have what I would call do-it-yourself cold air, where the atmosphere basically cools vertically. You get the dynamic cooling from the top down. Because if you look at the upper atmosphere here, it's actually rather cold. The bottom part of the atmosphere is cold to an extent because of that next high coming in, but then the high goes out. So you lose that part of the equation. But if we take a look at the lower dynamics, unfortunately, the icon model does it have an 850? No. So we can't really look at the 850 millibar level as far as upper air temperatures are concerned. But I would suspect that if we could, you would see that the levels above, say, 5,000 feet are relatively cold. You look at the upper air, of course. You are talking about a fairly vigorous shortwave trough. You see on the icon model, there's your upper low off the southeast coast. And here comes your very sharp negatively tilted trough that lifts up and overhead. In fact, it closes off another upper low right over northern New Jersey, southern New York there in the Hudson Valley. It closes off another upper low. So it does kind of imply that there's developing cold air aloft that'll move. And I think that's the reason why you see the icon that it changed it over from rain over to snow on Monday. That's not something that if I were forecasting tonight, at least up for New England, I might mention that there could be some mixing, but it's not something that I would really sort of, get too worked up about in a situation like this, because you have the cold air and then it just kind of goes away. The GFS does show that mixing area. If you look at it here, you can see it does develop this area of mix. It just does it further up to the north. So look, the bottom line is, in terms of the storminess, the really stormy conditions, it's going to be for South Carolina, go northeast of Charleston, okay, maybe up closer to Myrtle Beach. The coast of North Carolina into southeastern Virginia, I think, really bears the brunt of all of this. And then you're going to start to see those gales spread northward. For the northern mid-Atlantic states up into New England for tomorrow, should be, actually, I don't think it's going to be a half bad day. We'll probably be fighting clouds on one side and sun on the other. And the further south you go, more clouds. The further north you go, we'll use New York City as the boundary zone. So further north you go, New York City, you'll have much more sun. Further south, you'll probably have more in the way of clouds. And then we'll bring in those more of an easterly wind on Sunday, which I think brings in a lot of clouds and maybe even some coastal light rain or drizzle. And then we wait to see if any rain spreads back westward. If you believe the GFS, it actually holds it off. You don't even really get into any rain till at the earliest sometime Monday morning into Monday afternoon into Monday night. And then the low by that time is in the Gulf of Maine and over Nova Scotia and moving away. Now, around the rest of the country this weekend, of course, it's fairly quiet. You do have, with that next trough coming into the plains and moving towards the Great Lakes, it's going to produce a little bit of snow in parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin mixed with some rain. We don't have that, that negative EPO, that East Pacific Oscillation negative EPO is gone. So we've kind of lost the source of cold air from Western Canada, at least for now. But on the other hand, it's not overly warm across the U.S. at this point. It's the middle of November, and I think what you're seeing is kind of a normalization of the weather across the country, given the fact that the Canadian connection of cold air is cut off. Later next week, as that low is pulling out of the east, you do have some energy coming in to the northwest that moves into the northern Rockies with some snow. And you actually do have some colder air that comes down from Canada. And you see that snow that it produces across Nevada and Utah. But at the same time, you do have also quite a bit of rain. There's an upper low that's dropping down toward California. And you see the surface reflection of this with that 1,002 low there. This is by the middle part of next week. Now, after that, there's a little fantasy land stuff going on the GFS tonight. Cold front approaches Friday, and I've got no real issue with that. I think that will be the case. You do actually have some cold air coming in behind it, and then it brings a piece of that energy that's over California across the southern stream, and I think the snow lovers are probably, I didn't look, but you can see that it does take a low from that southern stream into Tennessee and gradually redevelops it along the coast. And yes, it does show for next weekend. This would be for next Sunday. Snow developing Ohio, Pennsylvania, and moves across New York State, southern except for the extreme north, and then on up to southeastern New England, just inland of the coast. So I'm sure the snow lovers are all looking at this and jumping up and down. I wouldn't exactly bet the ranch on it at the moment. As you know, that's kind of out there in fantasy land at about 192 and 204 hours out into the future. But it was kind of interesting that it did this. And I've been the proponent, I have been supporting the notion that the GFS was not really correct in trying to drop ridges in the troughs in the west in the long haul. And the last couple of runs, it seems to have finally come around. I think we're gonna look at the late afternoon GFS in the longer term, but I do want to show you the teleconnections today. And again, remember, these are snapshots that are taken every day. This is of the 0Z run. If you change the model, if the model changes, these are going to change. But what's really interesting here, two things from yesterday that have changed. One is that this model run is showing a much stronger P&A index, Pacific North America index. This tells us trough in the east, or troughing in the east, somewhere in the east, and ridge in the west, somewhere in the west, the western part of the U.S. So that is different from yesterday in that it was weakening it toward the end of the forecast period. Now it kind of it's not overly strong, it's not off the wall strong, but it is strong enough. Now, because of the low that's developing off the southeast coast of the United States and heading out into the Atlantic, that's going to actually help drive the NAO negative next week. So starting on the 18th, we go to neutral, and then it actually goes negative by a fair margin into next weekend. So if you look at where the model is trying to do something with that weather system was for next Sunday, you've got reasonably somewhat strong. I wouldn't even call it strong. Is probably not a good word to use. I like to use strong if the NAO, if the deviations are more than one, at least 1 or 1.5 standard deviations away from normal. And this is not even to 1. So let's call it a moderate NAO. It is weakening as we move through Thanksgiving week back to the neutral line, and then goes only slightly positive. But the fact that it changed as radically as it did kind of is a wake-up call that the GFS is on board with what the European's been showing for days now, and the European hasn't flipped at all. The EPO index, I thought the East Pacific Oscillation was pretty interesting too, because it's only weekly positive, and then it goes weekly negative for a few stretches here. It's not, it's not a really strong gung-ho signal for cold Canadian air, but on the other hand, it's certainly not a signal for warm air. And if you kind of take the NAO for what it's worth and the EPO for what it's worth, and it does suggest that for somebody there might be enough cold air to work out some sort of snow event down the road. But we'll see. In the meantime, if you look at the upper air on the GFS from this week, if we'll take it through the whole forecast period, the trough in the east never goes away. There's a brief period next week where you get a little bit of flat ridging here in the east, But that's only because we're in between weather systems. You've got, one trough lifting out here off the East Coast, right there. But you already have another one dropping in, and then you've got this really vigorous system in the southwest. And this is the part that when I look at this, as if you're going to look at this and you want to look at it from the standpoint where you could see maybe that there are possibilities of things happening down the road. This is a messy looking flow, but at the same time, there's a lot to this. There's a split flow here, and split flows can be a lot of fun. They are very difficult to forecast when you're in this sort of condition because you've got two jet streams now to worry about instead of one. So you've got multiple jet streams with multiple short waves to have to deal with. And when I say a split flow, if we follow the jet stream along, this is what it looks like. That's the northern part of the jet stream. But remember, you've got this upper low that's sitting down in the southwest. So there is a southern part of this that is in play. And what you look for, well, there's going to be disturbances in the northern stream, which you see here, and I've just marked those off. There's another one here off the coast of the Pacific Northwest. You're going to have disturbances rolling along in that southern stream, which is, of course, generate. Sometimes those upper lows, when they sit like that in the southwest, if they don't get out of the way, instead of coming out as one big piece, they may come out in little pieces. And that's something that we're not going to see it on the models necessarily now, but we might see that show up in the next couple of days. That's why you can't really put a whole lot of faith in what the GFS showed there for next weekend, if only because of the fact that it wants to take out the whole piece. In reality, it could wind up just taking out only a piece of it may come out. Maybe the rest of it will get left behind. We'll see. Meanwhile, take a look at what happens off the Pacific Northwest coast. That trough that I pointed out here, right there, okay, that splits in two. And part of it goes to the south, and part of it rides up over the top in Northwest Canada. This, again, if this could be a setup as we get toward the end of the month, if we hold on to this look going into December, I can tell you that there will be systems that we're going to have to deal with. This is a very blocky look at day 10 overall. Your jet stream is pretty far to the south. There is somewhat of a Canadian connection. You've got this split flow with energy all over the place. And you also have energy coming down in the northern stream. Pretty deep upper low here in southeastern Canada. So you've got cold. There is some cold air here that's coming back into the Great Lakes and Northeast as we get toward the end of the month. So if this is the look that we're going to be dealing with, it may not wind up being exactly this, but if it's something like this, we're going to have a very interesting beginning to first part of the month of December, assuming that everything holds. And in fact, when we go toward the end of this forecast period, which we know there's a lot of volatility here from run to run, but it actually does develop a fairly strong blocking high over Greenland toward the end of between day 10 and day 16. You've got a flow from Canada. Then you've got the split flow. This is really good, very exciting looking, actually. You got this split flow. You got a trough that's just east of 160, ridge that's coming up the west toward Alaska. If I were a snow lover, and if I wanted to look at a long-range pattern that I really, well, I am a snow lover, actually. I'm confessing. But for snow lovers, you see something like this, you can't be discouraged. I mean, we're at the point right now where you're looking at these things going into the end of November, beginning of December in pure speculative mode. You don't look at these things saying, oh my God, this is gospel, it's going to be that way. Clearly it's not. But when you look at the way you look at it is in terms of the overall flavor of the upper pattern, the way it's shaping up. And if it shapes up looking like this, you can't really complain too much. At the very least, it looks like it would give you opportunities for snow events during the month of December if this is what winds up happening. We also know that the models love to develop NAOs, negative North Atlantic oscillations and blocking patterns, and they in fact are incredibly elusive. How many times over the last several years have we seen models in the day after the day, even the day 7 time frame, after the day 7 time frame, develop blocking patterns that never happened? That's something that has occurred a lot of times where the models have advertised long-term blocking pattern. It never materialized. We haven't really had a solid year with a negative NAO during the wintertime. I think you really have to go back to 2010. It's 2010, 2011. The rest of the time, we've spent it where we've seen it occasionally. The winters that have been really productive in terms of cold and snow, 13, 14, and 14, 15, that was all driven by the East Pacific oscillation. And that's one of the reasons why I've said many times, if you're going to, if it's one of those things, if you had to choose which one do you want between the NAO and the EPO, I'd take the EPO any day. Just give me, make it strongly negative enough. I'd rather have that than have to deal with the NAO. And the other thing is, with respect to the North Atlantic oscillation and the NAO, is that if you have too strong an NAO, if it's too negative, that means that the block is so strong that the jet stream is so far south, you've got a problem. There was one other thing I wanted to check, by the way, while we're on the subject of the longer range. Hang on one second here. I want to check. No, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to switch to the North Atlantic region. And okay, so this is one thing that I think is really important also, is the fact that when you look at the Atlantic jet, we talk a lot about the Pacific jet. We've talked a lot about the Pacific fire hose jet. We also want to pay attention to the Atlantic jet, because one of the things that you want to see is some traffic out here. You want to see storms out in the Atlantic keep clogging, creating log jams. Now, clearly, those log jams have to be in certain positions, but you need those log jams at least where new storms coming into the East Coast are concerned, because then that would allow anything that develops to move up the coast rather than move out to the east. And if you notice here at 204 hours, we actually do have some log jamming developing. And this system here, which is what the GFS has for next weekend, we don't know how real that is, if it's the whole piece comes out. But let's just assume that right now, that it would be correct. Because of what's up ahead of it, it really can't just kind of run out in this direction. It has to lift up. So if we can create traffic out there in the Atlantic, it becomes helpful for subsequent storms so that they can move up the eastern seaboard. And in fact, we do seem to see in a blocking pattern, you're going to have log jams out there, and we do have them in the longer term. So I think if you're looking at this, if you're a winter weather lover as far as the Northeast is concerned, you have to look at this in the evolution of this pattern on the longer range models. The European also has the same. For those of you, I'll just show that really quick. But the European, same idea. I mean, it's never literally exactly the same, but as long as it shows the same idea, I'm okay with it. And it does, to a certain extent, it does show that. It actually has the blocking high over Greenland by day 10. So it brings the blocking in even faster. The Europeans actually been much more consistent here, showing this split flow for late this coming week. And the GFS, as I said, is now caught up to that idea. So if you look at the European, the GFS, in terms of figuring out where this is all going, are pretty much on the same page. Now let's see what happens in the coming days and over the next 2 weeks to see what else happens here. How much more evolution are we going to wind up having to deal with? But as I said, if snow is your thing and you're in the Northeast and you're looking at this, you can't be discouraged. And look, it's November 15th and we're talking about this. So, I mean, I can remember years where we're sitting at the middle and end of December still waiting for something to happen. So the fact that we're even discussing this as early as we are, huge plus in the terms of where this pattern is going. By the way, we've got a nice crowd tonight. Thanks everybody for being here. If you're new to my channel, welcome. And we will ask you if you would like, if you want to be part of these live streams on a nightly basis, you can just make sure you hit the subscribe button with you can subscribe with your Gmail account, and you're all set to go. And a quick promo for Sunday, that is our coffee with Cioffi at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning, where we can sit down comfortably and leisurely and do a weather live stream, and you won't have to wait till through football and everything else. I don't want to fight football anymore. That was another reason why I moved those live streams earlier. I have a lot more energy on Sunday morning than I do by Sunday evening to begin with. It frees up my day. It frees up your day. And also, I don't have to compete with football. Thank you so much, Tim. Rock on, Joe. Really appreciate it. Whose birthday is it today? Is it Javon Perry's birthday? Yes, happy birthday to Javon Perry. And many happy returns of the day. And also big hellos to everybody. The regulars are all on here. Scott Briller, Chuck Cardillo. We've got Johnny Quest on, sitting on the mountains waiting for that cold air to come in. Rick 8013, you've got your hands full there along coastal North Carolina with what's coming. So your local offices are busy, busy, busy. Ruthless Goat, anyone live through the winters of 77, 78, and 79? I would argue, those were very interesting winters. 77, 78. You could not even throw in 76, 77 in terms of the cold for the eastern part of the United States. One thing I do remember, by the way, is, and I got to go back and double check the stat records, but when you talk about weather occurring in a pattern, in a general pattern over a period of a couple of decades, it seemed to me that the 70s, when you look at the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was, if I remember correctly, those were banner years for snow for the most part in the western half of the United States, and not so much in the east. And when I say that, I mean take those whole 30 years as a whole. Yeah, there were individual years where that wasn't necessarily the case, but if you took that whole 30-year span of things, particularly in the 70s, and all I could seem to remember was it was, storm after storm in places like the Rockies and Colorado and Denver, even into March and April. In fact, there would be more snow on the front end months and the back end months, and then during the core of the winter months, you wouldn't see very much. But I also think that since the late 90s, or right around 2000, that has kind of shifted the other way, that most of the winters in that last 20-year period have been much more favorable for snow in the eastern half of the United States and a bit less favorable in the west. Again, there are exceptions to that. It's not every single year. Am I monitoring the 50 millibar pattern, Reaver? I think you mean the 10, for the stratosphere. I've looked at it from time to time. I think what I'm going to do is, unless it becomes a really big deal, I'm not going to really spend a whole lot of time on it, because I tried that last year and it kind of burned me in a way, because the vortex in the stratosphere last year split, as I recall, in the latter part of January, and it never really wound up changing the overall pattern that was in place for a good part of the winter. There was a brief period in February where it did get very cold, but in terms of the overall dominance of that fire hose Pacific jet, it never really, I guess the split in the stratosphere never really reached down and into the lower atmosphere and rearranged the chess pieces the way I think many people might have thought it would have. I'm kind of in learning mode about this, but I think I'm going to just kind of step away from it now and not let it get involved in my thinking with regards to setting up my where my mindset is going to be in the forecast time frame of, a week to maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks. I'm just going to kind of let that part of let that play out on its own, and then maybe in hindsight I'll go back and look at it and see if it was anything if it was anything meaningful. Robert Woods, by saying that you just, I guess what you're talking about with what I was talking about earlier with the overall pattern. By saying that you just triggered mass panic mode for everyone who doesn't listen to anything. That's a good point. Rick 8013, maybe we'll have a real winter on the eastern seaboard. Well, it could be. Certainly this way that things have started, the way things have been this past week with that EPO. I wrote that piece earlier this week about was that a shot across the bow or not? Was that a sign that the atmosphere is going to be going in that direction as far as the winter is concerned? And one of the things I pointed out was that you probably shouldn't count on it, if only because of the fact that if I remember distinctly last year in November that we went through a cold snap like this one around Thanksgiving, and the thing is that I remember thinking back then, was that a shot across the bow? And it turned out that it wasn't. It was a big misfire because of the fact, again, last year it was all about that fire hose Pacific jet. And by fire hose jet, what I mean is, if you look at the jet stream in the Pacific, was a straight line all across the Pacific. Draw a line from Japan to California, across the United States to about Virginia, and then take it out from there toward Europe. It was a straight line. And that just kind of flooded things with Pacific air, or at the very least, the warmer air came in. If there was some colder air, there was nothing really to hold it back. There was no real blocking that occurred last winter, of any meaningful blocking anyway. But you look at the Pacific right now, it's totally different from what it was last year. If you look at the Atlantic right now, I think it was totally different than what it was last year. Now, the question is whether this is going to make a difference for the I-95 corridor, because that's where apparently the rule states that it must snow every day from November to May in the I-95 corridor. We know that doesn't happen that way, but certainly I think we're going to see very interesting times going forward. MMWB, I find the deformation band of snow over northeastern Pennsylvania Monday showing up on the 18Z icon and the 18Z European very fast. I didn't see, you're looking at you got to look at some of the ensembles. You know what? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure whether that's going to happen or not. But for those of you, when you're talking about a deformation zone, this is where, you wind up seeing things happening in the atmospheric, in the atmosphere, where you're getting, I'm trying to put it correctly into words. You're sort of having the flow stretching in one area and then kind of shrinking in another, and as a result, you wind up with these areas where, if you were to look at it in a close-up basis, it's almost like you have small lows and small highs sort of next to each other. And when you have that zone that's kind of in the middle is sort of stands out, and this creates areas of precipitation, and you wind up with what we refer to as banding. So as a result, you'll get these bands of precip that develop that are far heavier, but either side of that, those bands, if you're kind of right in the middle, you really don't get very much. And you see this a lot in really intense storms, in non-tropical storms. If you see them a lot in snowstorms, I've seen that happen many times where you get these storms get so strong that you wind up that the precip just kind of forms these bands. And they might be, if you look at the northwest side of a cyclone, so the band might go kind of like this. You're seeing it, you may be seeing it, my finger doing it on the flip side. But my point is, you just see these bands, all right? And if you get caught, and if the band settles over you, you could wind up with twice as much precipitation as somebody that might be only 5 or 10 miles away. I saw that happen. I happened to remember a couple of snowstorms during the 2010 timeframe, a few of them, where that band actually formed right about where my house is. And, maybe it was about 10 miles wide. And then there would be a gap. And then you'd have another band on to the west and another band out to the east. And you would, if you were to drive through that, you would literally went from 2 feet of snow to maybe 13, 14 inches in between the bands, back up to another 2 feet of snow, back down to another 13, 14 inches. Those deformation bands usually come, they usually come with really intense systems. They usually happen in systems where you have an upper low like this. So if you're going to have that happen, that upper low has to be very vigorous and intact. If it winds up weakening as it lifts up to the northeast, then you're not going to really have that sort of banded look. You see it on the radar too. When you look at it on the radar, you're going to see that that signature, that comma-shaped signature. You'll see it like a head. It'll almost like we call it a comma head. You'll see that in there. And if you ever get underneath one of those comma heads, you get absolutely clobbered, like 5-inch-an-hour snows in comma heads. Timothy Veltman, what's going on in Manalapan? That's the second time today I saw that a truck from Manalapan. Oh, you saw up where you are. Okay, because you're up north of Albany, and Manalapan is in New Jersey. And it's not Manalapan, okay? It's Manalapan. By the way, speaking of New Jersey, Alfred Phillips, don't go away, because there is something I'm supposed to ask you. Okay, so stay right there, okay? Stay right there. I know you're in Wainwright, Alaska. You're probably not going to want to go anywhere other than where you are, but hold on one second. But if you are in New Jersey next Wednesday, this is a good point to remind everybody that I will be at the Bayonne Library in Bayonne, New Jersey, at 7 o'clock on Wednesday, November 20th. Come on out. It's free. It's open to all. You don't have to live in Bayonne. You don't need a library card. Just come on out, and we usually have these talks. They last about an hour and a half, and then they continue out in the parking lot afterwards. So please, if you're in New Jersey, if you're near Bayonne, do come by to my talk at the Bayonne Library. Now, Alfred, I did get somebody on a video from a couple of days ago was asking me. They are from the Northeast. They are heading up into. I think he's in the military. He's assigned in Alaska, and he's headed up there. And he wanted to know whether there were any YouTube weather channels that he can watch up there with regards to the weather going on in Alaska. So if you can share that with me, or if you don't mind, if you go back, I think it was from a video about 3 days or so ago, and or somehow let me know. You can email me or message me some suggestions. I can pass it along. Well, wait, okay, is it Manalapan? No. I know you. Don't worry about it. It's from Manalapan. We're all getting excited. Manalapan. Scott Briller's got it. That's correct. That's exactly how you pronounce it. And Happague is Hapag, not Happague. Okay, that's out near me. All right, it's 8:10 in Eastern time. We talked about a lot today. My voice is starting to get a bit hoarse here, and I think I might be starting to get a little bit of a nosebleed, so I got to go take care of that. All right, so look, here's the deal tomorrow. If I am like really burned out. So I may skip the live stream tomorrow. I will do my weather in 5. If it looks like it's going really crazy in North Carolina, I may do a quick live stream tomorrow evening. But absent of that, we will wait until Sunday morning for Coffee with Cioffi at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. So do look for that. And that really is about it. I think I'm going to just leave it at that. It's been a very interesting week. My TV career is done, but my post career has begun 24/7 on my websites, my 3 website pages, meteorologistjoecioffi.com, weatherlongisland.com, nycweathernow.com, and my weather platform on Patreon, which is patreon.com/meteorologist Joe Cioffi. You can find links for that, by the way, if you look on the descriptor to this live stream or the descriptor to this video. And don't forget, download my 2 free weather apps, the Meteorologist Joe Cioffi weather app on Google Play or on the App Store, and Angry Ben's weather app, the Angry Weatherman. Okay, that's it. And I know, weather lady, you're right. The humidifier for the dry nose, that might help. It is a bit dry in here tonight. Okay. See you on Sunday morning. Have a great rest of your Friday night. Enjoy your Saturday. Be safe if you're in North Carolina. Alfred, stay warm up in Alaska. We'll see you over the weekend.